So while the Jacksonville Jaguars have had a very busy offseason so far, from hiring Doug Peterson to Doug Peterson filling out his coaching staff, now they got to look forward to the free agency and the draft. They got a lot of work to do this offseason, and I already did a full breakdown video talking about Doug Peterson and the rest of the coaching staff. If you guys want to watch that video, I will link to that up above. But I'm going to be talking about in today's video the 6 free agents I want to see the Jaguars pursue this offseason through free agency. I'm going to be talking about 3 on offense and 3 on defense if I was in the front office of the Jaguars, who I would be pursuing. But before we actually hop into today's video, if you guys don't know already, I do a podcast every single week called the Don't Overthink It Podcast with my co-host, Chill Takes, where we talk NFL and NBA, and the podcast comes out every Thursday or Friday morning on Apple Podcasts, on my YouTube, and on Spotify. So if you guys want to go check that out, I will link to that down below. It's a great podcast, and I'd love for you guys to come and check it out. But let's actually get right into today's video. So I'm going to preface my comments by actually referring to last year's free agent signings, which the Jaguars had, with Trent Baalke in here as his first year as general manager. So we can kind of get a rough idea of maybe what this team is going to do and target through free agency. So last year in free agency on offense, we signed Marvin Jones Jr., Jamal Agnew, Phillip Dorsett, Chris Manhertz, and Carlos Hyde. Then on defense last season, we signed Shaq Griffin, Roy Robertson Harris, Rudy Ford, Rayshawn Jenkins, Malcolm Brown, Jihad Ward, and Damian Wilson. So the Jaguars went a lot more defense-centric last year in free agency. I actually think that will be completely different, considering how bad the offense was last season, through a lot of injuries, through a lot of rookie struggles, bad coaching. But also, I think that the Jaguars, Doug Peterson, Press Taylor, and a lot of these guys that we have on offense now, Mike McCoy as well, these guys are going to be a lot more offensive-centric. I think that the Jaguars are going to pursue offense in a heavier way this offseason through free agency and the draft. So that brings me to my first offensive free agent I want the Jaguars to pursue, and I think you guys are going to love this, and I think that this is realistic, man. Allen Robinson is going to come back to Jacksonville in that feel-good coming home story. Allen Robinson is a 6'2", 220-pound receiver, a great wide receiver number 1 in the NFL when he's healthy, a great athletic, big, physical, point-of-attack wide receiver who's been able to do it all and has had multiple successful seasons in the NFL. Obviously, he started his tenure in Jacksonville when we drafted him. I think that was back in 2014. Allen Hurns and Allen Robinson, the Allen brothers at one point, they were dominant. And Allen Robinson coming back to Jacksonville just needs to come back. The Jaguars are in seek of a wide receiver number 1. Allen Robinson is searching for a big payday at 29 years of age. And Allen Robinson, the last couple of seasons, has had success, disregarding a down season in 2021 this past season, with inconsistent play from Andy Dalton, Justin Fields, and Nick Foles, to really no fault of Allen Robinson, where he had 66 targets, 38 receptions, 410 yards, and 1 touchdown. Let's date back to 2015 when Allen Robinson broke onto the scene for Jacksonville with Blake Bortles. 151 targets, 80 receptions, 1,400 yards, and 14 touchdowns. Then we fast forward to Chicago. In 2019, 154 targets, 98 receptions, 1,147 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Fast forward to 2020, 151 targets, 102 receptions, 1,250 yards, and 6 touchdowns. We know the type of receiver Allen Robinson is. He has no excuse to want to come back to Jacksonville, considering the feel-good story, playing with a good quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, playing in an offensive system that will probably benefit him with guys like Doug Peterson, Press Taylor, and the rest of the crew. But also, he gets the comeback story, he gets the warm weather, no state income tax. I think that this is a perfect fit. I think that Allen Robinson would love to come back to Jacksonville. He's already talked about Trevor Lawrence previously last year, talking about playing with the next prodigy of the NFL. I think that this makes all too much sense, and I would pay Allen Robinson somewhere between a Cortland Sutton and a Robert Woods type of deal, since he is 29 years of age. I'm talking about 4 years, $60 million. Somewhere in that pricing range, I'm willing to pay Allen Robinson at the age of 29. His market value is around $15 million a year. That's fine. The Jaguars desperately need a wide receiver 1. Allen Robinson's looking to get paid. I think that this makes too much sense, considering that the Jags have the 3rd most cap space at $56 million this offseason. Now that brings me on to my second offensive player I want the Jaguars to target this offseason, and this is really dependent on what the Jaguars decide to do with impending free agents Andrew Norwell and AJ Cann, which I've already prefaced my comments by saying earlier a couple weeks back I would like for one of them to go. I really don't care if Andrew Norwell or AJ Cann goes, one or the other, because we also have Ben Barch. So that brings me on to Austin Corbett. He's a guard for the LA Rams, former second round pick back in 2018. His projected market value is at about 8.7. He's not at the top of the top guards and offensive linemen with guys like Orlando Brown and a couple of other guys, but he's a very solid interior offensive lineman. The LA Rams obviously did a great job protecting Matthew Stafford in that Super Bowl for the most part, and I think Austin Corbett would be a very nice signing. You don't got to pay this guy like we paid Andrew Norwell back in 2017 or 2018, whenever we paid him the highest max dollars for an offensive lineman ever. I'm thinking somewhere around the 3-year, $30 million. Even if I want to push that limit to 35 just to really beef up that offensive line, that's something I'd love to do, because I expect the Jaguars to go and take Evan Neal, have Walker Little, have Ben Barch upgraded, Brandon Linder's going to be back, and if we get a guy like Austin Corbett, I think that's a very solid foundation you got right there. That's another guy I want the Jaguars to target. And that brings me to my last offensive player I want the Jaguars to target this offseason, and that's going to be tight end Evan Engram. Now this one I'm a little on the fence with, just because of the fact that we do have Dan Arnold. I don't really care if James O'Shaughnessy walks out of the door this year, considering he's getting up there in age. Really don't care about Jacob Hollister if he wants to stick around or whatever. But for me, Evan Engram, I think, can be a nice dual threat type of tight end, because he's really more of a receiver who plays in that tight end position back when he was with the New York Giants, because he's not going to be a Giant anymore now that he's an impending free agent. Evan Ingram's had some success. His best season came back in 2017 in his rookie year. He had 115 targets, 64 catches, 722 yards, and 6 touchdowns. This season, he had a bit of a drop-off, 73 targets, 46 catches, 408 yards, and 3 touchdowns, but he's never really played with a good quarterback. From Eli Manning and Daniel Jones, you really can't credit or discredit Evan Engram, So I wouldn't mind really paying him. Me, personally, I'm more on the drafting Jaleel Billingsley. I think he's a phenomenal tight end out of Alabama. That's a completely separate topic I'd get into. That's where I would rather go in the draft in the second and third round if we could end up getting some good value there. But Evan Engram, I don't think that's a bad signing if we went out and got him alongside a guy like Dan Arnold. But also, if instead we didn't want to go Evan Engram, I wouldn't mind getting a guy like Christian Kirk or Will Fuller. Just another good veteran in there. But Evan Engram, that's what I'm going to talk about. Now let's go to the defense. Now I'm going to get into 3 guys on the defense, and I'm going to be talking about one guy particularly who I think is going to be a big name splash free agent, hopefully for the Jaguars this offseason. That brings me to safety Marcus Williams, coming over from the New Orleans Saints. The Saints have had a great secondary these last couple of seasons with Marshawn Lattimore, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and Marcus Williams. Phenomenal, talented players, and Marcus Williams has been a great safety in the game. Since entering the league back in 2017, Marcus Williams has 320 tackles, 38 pass deflections, and 15 interceptions. He's been a great guy in this league. Now, that's a little bit questionable because you probably want to put him alongside a guy like Andre Sisco. That really then depends on what the Jags want to do with Rayshawn Jenkins and Daniel Thomas. Rayshawn, who signed on a 4-year, $35 million contract extension last season for the Jaguars. He's taken a $9 million cap hit this season and a $13 million dead cap hit. So if the Jaguars sign Marcus Williams, that means that they're probably going to have to let go of Rayshawn Jenkins, and they're probably going to have to eat some of that money. But I'm willing to do that to go and get a top-tier quality guy like Marcus Williams, who's only 25 years of age, and hopefully him and Sisco can be the future safety in that secondary piece. I would be willing to honestly overpay a guy like Marcus Williams, especially while he's in the middle of his prime. I'm thinking somewhere between 5 years, $80 million. He's projected market value anywhere between $15 and $17 million. Marcus Williams, I think, is deserving of that money, and I wouldn't mind overpaying for a guy like him because the Jaguars, at least in the top 1 of the draft right now, we're not eyeing a safety. We're not eyeing Kyle Hamilton. I'd be willing to overpay for a guy like Marcus Williams, and I think that's honestly realistic. Now let me get into my last 2 defensive players, and that other one is going to come with B.J. Hill, defensive tackle for the Cincinnati Bengals, who just came off a Super Bowl appearance. B.J. Hill was taken in the second round back by the New York Giants in 2018. Last season, he had a not very solid, but he had an okay year. 5.5 sacks, 50 tackles as well. Just kind of another solid depth piece to put alongside Malcolm Brown and Roy Robertson Harris and a couple of other, and Devon Hamilton and a couple other guys on that defensive line as well, just to really beef it up. I mean, he's just a solid role player, and I think that he can develop into someone who could be a nice rotational piece because I really don't see us keeping Taven Bryan around. 26 years of age, I wouldn't mind that signing. And then my last signing I'm going to be talking about, and on the defensive end, is going to be Emmanuel Ogbah. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. I've known about him since he's been playing in Miami. He's a former second-round pick back in 2016. And these last 2 seasons, he has balled out for the Miami Dolphins and that defense. Last season, finishing with 9 sacks, 41 tackles, and 1 forced fumble. In 2020, he finished with 9 sacks, 42 tackles, and 3 forced fumbles. He has been a man amongst boys on that defensive edge, and I think the reason that the Jaguars might go and target a guy like Emmanuel Ogbah in comparison to Von Miller and Chandler Jones, those guys will obviously be demanding even more money, but not only that, it's a little unrealistic for the Jaguars to go and get those guys at this point too. I don't see the Jaguars taking Kayvon Thibodeau or Aiden Hutchinson, so I think that they're going to go after a middle tier type of edge rusher, but you never know. This is all indicative on what the Jaguars want to do this offseason. These are just my thoughts on who I would want to pursue. I'd be willing to pay Ogbah, who's only 28 years of age, probably a 4-year, $30 to $35 million deal as well. He's definitely deserving of it, and I'd like to see him alongside Josh Allen, Chason, and whoever we want to take in the draft. But that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. I know I did a lot of talking. Wanted to really break down a lot of these guys. And also, I will be doing draft videos and more like mock drafts as time gets closer and we really get through free agency, because then that's going to really play a big factor into who we're going to draft and maybe what we do from trading down to maybe trading up a bunch of picks from the 6th round. We'll have to see. But thank you guys so much for sticking around. I want to hear your guys' thoughts down below. Did you guys like any of my signings, and who are some top signings that you want the Jaguars to get, and try to keep it a little bit realistic? I'm definitely curious to hear what you guys got to say. But Brett James, aka BJ, I'm out, y'all. Go Jags, baby. Peace.